This is a bad thing. February of 1969, after the bad Vietnamese, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese had snuck in at night, and they had satchel charged almost half the fleet of our 16 Chinooks and blew them up and had them burning in the revetments. The funny thing is I had just flown a tactical emergency that evening, and I landed about 1 o'clock, and I wasn't in bed asleep for 15 minutes when they started blowing up. The unfortunate thing, one poor soldier lost his life in this. He happened to be standing directly behind one of the aircraft when the satchel charge went off. The good thing was there was a crew member sleeping on every one of these aircraft. And when they heard somebody throw something in the back, most of them bailed out the side and weren't hurt at all. The ones that weren't satchel charged, several of them, they used an RPG, which is like an anti-tank missile, and they shot them where the control closet was behind the left pilot. And that's where all the control tubes came up to run everything on the Chinook. They knew enough that was the place that would hurt them where they were not flyable. As you can see in these pictures, after a Chinook burns, they all were sitting there full of fuel. So these A models were all sitting there with 4,000 pounds of JP4 on them to help the fire along. And you could walk over to the revetments and look in there. There was actually puddles of aluminum that had solidified 3 or 4 inches thick in the revetments where these had burned. It's hard to believe that they could burn like that, but they did. Let's see what else we show here. One of them maybe that had RPG hit coming around here. I just waited till the sun came up enough in the morning to take these pictures. So this is probably about 5 o'clock in the morning I'm out. There's a tank. Okay. My favorite helicopter is sitting here. That's the back of one. And they're going to show the one I liked the best to fly was called Pig Power. And all that's left is the nose of it. And you can see the words Pig Power on the nose. There it is. That was a sweet flying Chinook. But you can see what a mess this was with everything. On the front of each of those revetments, there's one that got RPG'd right where it needed to be at the back of the thing there where all the controls came up. And most of these revetments had a number on the front of them, which is the last 3 numbers and the serial number of the aircraft that was parked there. It was a real mess. It's hard to believe that, unfortunately, it was poor planning when they put this area right out on the edge of the perimeter. And the only thing they had around to try to keep the Vietnamese from seeing it was a very tall, maybe 20-foot tall RPG screen, like you see in the background there. And you couldn't see through it. And that was supposed to keep the bad guys out, but it didn't work too good, apparently. There's my sweetheart again, Pig Power. Gone, done. In the end, you'll see what they did with her. They drug her down into a ditch and crushed her. Here we are doing some of the cleanup work after. You've got all kinds of heavy equipment and stuff over there. They dug a great big ditch, and they just proceeded to take all the remains from these Chinooks and dump them in the ditch, and they buried them. I was thinking to myself afterwards, the war was over, that maybe there's thousands of dollars worth of aluminum and magnesium in that ditch. Here comes one of our other Chinook company's aircraft coming in to stop to see the mess. If you look on the back, there's some kind of a square insignia on the aft pylon, and when he lands, you'll see one sitting there, and it has a round insignia right there on the aft pylon. On the top and the back, that was one of our aircraft from the 242nd. But this is a good shot of a Chinook coming in, landing. Rotating around, coming in to land on that area was called the North 40. After this all happened, they put revetments over in the middle of the field next to the runway, and all the flyable aircraft were kept over away from the perimeter. And that's a typical Chinook landing with the nose up. A Chinook wants to hover with the rotor blades level, the earlier ones. The newer ones now, they have a computer that makes the fuselage sit level because they put more than one hook under to carry all the weight they pick up now. These particular A models could pick up roughly in Vietnam about 8 to 8,200 pounds. That's a little over 4 tons. The new ones that are coming out today in 018, the new F models they're building lift close to 25,000 pounds, which is like 12 and a half tons. So the new ones can lift a lot more than we could back in Vietnam, just with the improvements of the power in the rotor blades. One of the reasons they added hooks on the new ones is they couldn't put that much weight on one hook. It would damage the airframe. So if you look at these new Chinooks now, they have 3 hooks underneath them that are flying today. If we hear more stuff being dumped in the ditch. At one point, I think they show one of the old towers that we had around the base that they used to use the spot when somebody was shooting rockets or mortars into the base, the bad guys. And they used to triangulate, but then by this time they had gone to a radar system and they weren't being used anymore. Let's see what we got here. There's a big Euclid truck sitting there in the middle. They're filling the Euclid truck up with pieces of Chinooks, and then they back over and dump it in the ditch. Pretty soon, I think we're going to see Pig Power's ending. My favorite, there it is, the nose of Pig Power, what was left of her. They took the rotor blades off of it and just drug it down into the ditch. And when they got it down in the ditch, they rode over it with a bulldozer and crushed it and then buried it where it laid. And that's what happened to all those Chinooks that were damaged. You can go online and go to the 242nd Assault Support Helicopter Company in Vietnam, and it'll come up and it'll list the aircraft lost that day. Now here's the world-famous flying crane. You see these today working on forest fires because they're all owned by civilians now. The Army doesn't have any anymore. Coming in to pick up one of the Chinooks that was repairable, that got RPG'd in the control closet. One of the advantages they had, if you watch this picture, the hook's going to come down by that wheel. See it coming down? It's on a cable. And the advantage of a crane is when they went to pick something up, they could tell exactly what it weighed. We had no idea what it weighed. All we tried to do is pick it up with the Chinook. If we could pick it up, we'd go. So he's going to let that hook down. And you have the 2 guys up on top of that Chinook getting blown like crazy to hook it up to take it away. I am actually laying on the ground with my camera in a plastic bag to take these pictures because the sand was blowing so bad when I took these pictures. Now, this guy should get the shock from the buildup of static electricity in a Chinook from all the moving parts. Let's see if he does it. Yeah, that was hot, wasn't it? You didn't like that. Well, go grab it. You got it. Okay. Once you get it, it's not going to be there anymore. It's just a one-time good, like grabbing a hold of a spark plug wire or something. And the 2 guys are down. The slings are going to come tight. Now, if you watch this, it's one of the best examples of rotor blade coning on a regular helicopter. Watch the blades on the crane. As he starts to pick them up, you'll see the rotor system cone up from the weight. And that's just a common thing with a regular helicopter. One of the advantages of a Chinook is the tail rotor on the back of this crane is probably taking 700 or 800 horsepower. Whereas with the tandem rotor from a Chinook, every bit of power you have goes into lift. You lose nothing for the anti-torque in the tail rotor. But he's got it up. Luckily, you only had to fly this thing 5 to 10 miles over to Benoit, where they would put it in a C-5A or something and ship it back to Pennsylvania for rebuild. But once it gets moving, you'll see the odd thing that Chinooks like to fly sideways. It's just something funny about them. Normally what they would do, and I don't know why they didn't do it in this case, they'd put a little drogue chute on them to make the fuselage streamline. But once he gets moving, that thing's going to go sideways, and he's going to drag it all to Benoit sideways. And here she goes. Probably 6 months later, she was back in Vietnam again after going to Morton, Pennsylvania, to the Boeing Vertol factory, and they fixed her all up and made her like a brand new A model and shipped her back. Nice deal. Goodbye. So a lot of people have never seen a crane like that do anything like that. They also had pods they could put on that crane that were like, took underneath the whole back that they could carry troops, or they had hospital ones that they could set up that had bunks in it for people who were injured. But pretty much in Vietnam, they were just like the Chinooks. They did nothing but sling load work, moving stuff. because that's about 95% of what we did. Now, if you notice, the doors are closed on this Huey. The reason is it's medevac. It's got a cross on the door, and it has no guns. So that's bringing somebody that's hurt into the hospital. And there comes a crane again doing something. Okay, here goes one of my Chinooks taking off out of the North 40. You can't see it from here, but the rotor blades are painted oddly so that if you're above it, you look down, you cannot miss seeing the rotor, see the Chinook. In other words, you didn't want anybody flying into you. And so you notice the nose comes up, the rotor blades get level, and then it'll pick up off the ground. And that's the way they hovered with the early model A, Bs, and even C Chinooks that had the single hook. But you'll see the guy playing with it, and he'll bring in a little power, and then it'll just come up off the ground. What he's doing there, he's matching torques and everything with the beep buttons to make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And there he goes off with the Boeing Hilton. Going to go off to go to work. You can see the one hook there behind the front and rear wheels. That's where you picked up the loads with. In a later picture, I have a picture. I came in and picked up a load, and I had a guy have my camera and take pictures. You'll see later. Well, he's checking to make sure the oil pressures and everything are right, and then he clears for the tower to leave. And you'll just see the nose drop a little bit, and off he'll go. Because to make it go forward, you actually decrease the pitch in the front blade and increase it in the back, and then off you go. There he goes. Up, up, and away. It's hard to believe that thing actually flies, huh? There's one having maintenance done underneath it. That was the maintenance area. We used to always joke if we were stuck someplace, we brought the Boeing Hilton with us. We had our own accommodations. I think he's just going to go around the other side of the base to where the resupply pad was, where we used to pick up all the sling load stuff and haul it over. Okay, here's an OV-10. So he used a forward air controller. It's the guy who went out and marked the targets for the fighters. And he'd go out and he'd shoot 4 things of rockets down. Well, who's this bathing beauty? Is it anybody we know? I must have had a half a day off or something. That's back when I was still smoking them nasty cigarettes. I think it's time for me to go in for a swim. We built this swimming pool out of plastic blivets that they use for holding fuel. And then we got a water purification system, which is basically a filter. You'll see it in the corner picture or something. And we had this right next to our officers' club at the 242nd. We called the OK Corral. But you can see how it's made out of blivets. But it was perfectly clear. The water was fine. It was as close as you get to back in the States. You see all this handmade like ladder. When you get over to see the diving board is a piece of PSP, which is an aluminum pieces they put together to make a runway. They snapped together, but it made a good diving board. See, it bounced all right. It wasn't too good. But there we go. That was one of the few. I think I maybe swam in that thing 3 or 4 times the whole time I was there, because most of the time I was flying. Here comes a Huey that had a bad day. You notice the tail boom is day glow yellow? It means they had just replaced the tail boom on it because somebody must have screwed it up pretty good. The Huey was the baby workhorse over there. They carried all the troops and did all that. There was a little pad over there that they used to do some sling loading out of. You can see that tower on the left-hand side of the picture. That's one of those towers they used to use to see the rockets coming in. And there goes a Huey off with a little sling load. They could carry maybe 1,500 to 2,000 pounds. That's about the maximum they could carry. But they did their job. They worked just like the rest of us. He's hauling that off to somebody. It looks like, I think what he's doing, he's actually going to drop that. It looks like 3 55-gallon drums full of napalm. And what they do is they put a flare next to it, and they drop it. And when they've dropped it, it kick off the flare. Here's another good shot of one of our Chinooks picking up. Up and away. The rotor blades turn at about 250 to 220 RPM. I had to laugh. Some guy was on TV talking about how they turned to 20,000 RPM. And here's the thing. He's walking over to get a load. See the guy standing there on the load? And then the pilot is listening to the flight engineer. He's laying in the back looking out the square hole where that is, telling him what to do. And then what happens is he'll pick it up, he'll grab it, he'll get it 10 feet off the ground. If he can get it 10 feet off the ground, that tells him there's no problem with the weight. Oh, it's a multiple. It's two separate loads. Okay, right there now he knows that it's not too heavy for him, and he'll leave with it. The trick was if you could hover at 10 feet, you could fly it anywhere. And sometimes we'd have triple sling loads. It just, depending on what they were taking. The top one on there, I'm sure, is artillery shells, and the second one's something else. And here comes a regular slick in. You'll see he's got the doors open. And there's a gunner at the very back where you can't see it in the corner. And he's coming into land. Got a load in there that's full of boxes and stuff. And that's for one of the UE companies was there at Kuchi and outside of Saigon. It's a pretty good landing. This is what I was an instructor with when I got back to Fort Rucker. Fly over 1,000 and some hours in a Chinook, and I went back to Fort Rucker, and they made me a UE instructor. Utilization of the Army doesn't work too good. Now, this one you can see is empty. There's nothing in there. All those cans you see in the foreground, that's from the chemical people. That has that powdered CS gas in it. We used to drop it like a bomber for them. And is there a gunner in the back corner? I don't even see him in there. Maybe there's nobody in there. Here comes this bee coming in to pick up a load. There's one here that I had somebody wait for me. And what this is here, right beyond us where we were, was the POL, was where the fuel is. And all these UE companies would come in and they'd land and get gas when they came back from doing something. This is one of the hardest formations to do, a trail formation. If you can do it good, you'll turn the corner and sometimes it'll just look like there's only one helicopter. But it's really hard to do. And you got to be real careful. When you go to slow down, the guy in the front has to telegraph it, or you'll have everybody shooting all over the place. Just think of the money spent over there on all this stuff. Those UEs were probably, at the time, $500,000 a piece, and the Chinooks were $5 or $10 million a piece. But that whole company is going over to the POL to fuel up before they go out on their next mission. And there goes one of our girls. The trick is Chinooks are faster than they look. Chinooks have a thing on them called speed trims that start at 60 knots and go to 160. So the fuselage never changes the attitude. Whereas like a UE, the faster it goes, the nose goes down. And that kind of helped us when bad guys were shooting at us because they had a hard time judging our speed. We were usually going faster than they thought we were. And I think this is one of our Chinooks going into POL also to fuel up. We carried 4,000 pounds of fuel in an A-model Chinook, and that only lasted like an hour and a half. So people say, would you like to have a dime for every hour you flew over there? I said, no, just give me 5 cents for every gallon of JP4 I burnt. Here's one of the little Vietnamese gals that were our hoots maids over there. They kept the rooms clean, polished your boots, washed all your thing and everything for about $15 a week. And those are the revetments we made. They're made out of PSP and wood and filled with dirt. Previous to that, there was just sandbags. And here's one, you're going to see a bunch of this. This is a Cobra. They were just coming into the area at the time. And here's Alan B. Smith, one of my co-pilots. He had started in Korea and flew H-21s and everything. And he's just going to relax. He had to do something on your day off just not to be crazy. He could take his tongue and put it right up on top of his nose, literally. And here's Ben Gray. He had a real deep voice. And there's an OV-10 going into land, the forward air controller. And that's a slick. How do you tell it's a slick? Because the doors are open. If it was a medevac, the doors would be closed. And this is a guy named Bruce. And I love to mess with him, as you'll see here in a minute. Okay, here we are flying into a typical little patrol base. We're flying in to bring in a load. This is the kind of places we worked in and out of all day long. It's a little circular thing built up, and they patrol out of there, and they do things out of there. That's the sling load in and out all day long to these places. They had these all up and down. Who is that? Steve Cannon? See, that's the proof that I really did fly them, you know. Here's a good look at the inside of a Chinook cockpit. You're going to come around and show you the panel. There you go. And that's Alan B. Smith, the guy I was joking about. He was actually a W-3, but he didn't have time in Chinook, so he was my co-pilot. Good pilot. We were coming out of someplace. I think we were coming out of Cu Chi there. That's out where the perimeter was. Outside. Yeah, there's the North 40. What he did, he just came out of the POL, and he's going to fly around and land at the North 40. You can see how the revetments were set up. At nighttime, if we flew, we came around and we shined the lights all here in the wire, where the perimeter wire was. And that way that would help the guys out there in the dark make sure there's nothing out there. And here the maintenance is over there in the corner, and we're coming around to land. Done for the day, I guess. We're coming in and quitting for the day. Come in and land her, set her down. Here's the guy guiding us in the revetment. When you get it on the ground, you could use the power steering with a knob in the back that controlled the left rear wheel. And you could steer it just like a car. So he's working us in where he wants us to park. And you'll see he's changed his hands when he wants us to stop. And then I believe I took a picture. There's a Cobra again. I'm sorry about that. But you'll watch the rotor blades now as we shut down. You'll see the rotor blades slow down, on the Chinook. We used to keep track of things in the corner of the windshield there, how many sorties we did, flying around all over the place. And you got to remember, these rotor systems on a Chinook, even the A model, they're 60 feet in diameter, and they're about 3 feet wide, the blades. So it's a pretty big hunk. There's actually 65 to 70 pounds of weight in the tip to stabilize them. And I'll tell you, I got hit with a 37 millimeter one day, and it blew a hole in the front rotor blade big enough I could stick my head through, and it didn't separate from the aircraft, which I wouldn't be talking to you today if it did. So here's some UE shots. There wasn't a time when you were over there that you couldn't hear those UEs flying 24 hours a day, no matter where you were. They were just flying, moving troops, doing this, doing that. It's what they call the slick unit, UH ones. I figured there was probably 200 of them based at Chu Lai with 3 or 4 UE companies. There's my favorite Cobra again. I'm sorry about that. The reason I hopped to these Cobras when they went by, like I said before, they were new to country. And they were a new fad. They were just coming in to replace the old C-model gunships. I have some slides someplace that shows them shooting the miniguns at night. I did with a time delay. Guess what? A Cobra again. Like I say, I'm sorry about this. I didn't realize I was doing this at the time. But they were new to country. They were, kind of like the new Corvette model that nobody had seen before. So. But basically, one of the things different between a Cobra and a regular UE is it has a different rotor system. And there's the old OH-6. We used to call him the flying egg. They were eventually replaced with the Jet Rangers. They called them OH-58s. Because Hughes tried to stick it to the government on the replacement parts on these, and the Army turned around and bought the 58s from Bell. Here's another Huey company coming in trail. Like I say, that's a very difficult formation to do. You know, a lot of times you'll see helicopters and Visa 3s and all that. That's difficult, but not as bad as doing this trail formation. And they thought that this made it harder for them to be shot at. And then if they were being shot at, it let both gunners on both sides of the airplane be available to return suppression fire. Because basically when we shot out of a helicopter at the ground, we weren't particularly trying to kill somebody. We're just trying to get them to quit shooting at us. Because we had a usual name for that when you got shot with a bullet. We called it foreign object damage. There's one of the hooch maids taking somebody's laundry back. There's the old revetments in these pictures with the sandbags. OV-10 again. I liked it. I got a ride in one. Fun airplane. STOL. Short landing and takeoff. They could land probably in 100 feet or less. And that's my Super 8s from Vietnam. I hope you enjoyed it. Any questions? Just give me a ring.